Hello everyone, this is a video series that I am creating. I will be your host, Adam. For those of you that don't know me, I am the current HST of Kings of New York and former Sabbat coordinator for One World by Night. These videos' purpose and goal is to create an educational series of hopefully about 10 episodes to give new players introductions and history into what One World by Night is and the World of Darkness as well. We know that it can be a bit overwhelming for individuals who want to come join our organization and play our games. There's a lot of information to kind of unpack and the history of the organization itself. My goal is to help spread that knowledge and information that I have and hopefully give you all a bit of help in getting ingrained in your interest in One World by Night and our games. So hopefully over the next 10 episodes or so, you'll have a better understanding. You, of course, can review these at any time you like. Go back, maybe learn something new. I figured I would share some of my knowledge in history to help other people, hopefully getting them more interested in our organization and the games we play. So with that, I'm going to start off with what is Vampire the Masquerade? So Vampire the Masquerade is a tabletop role-playing game, also been converted into what's called live-action role-playing. These two things are role-playing games, obviously, where you make a character, come up with a story, play with your friends, work with a storyteller to tell these stories, and generally just have a good time and fun. A little bit of escapism that we can all enjoy now and then. Vampire the Masquerade itself came out in 1991 with its first edition from White Wolf Studios. Later on had numerous revisions. Second edition came out in 1993, and revised came out in 1998. These are the three core major editions of the original White Wolf team. After that, we have the Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition, which came out in 2011. These are all various editions of the role-playing game, and along with them came the live-action rules as well that we use as an organization. I'll review that later on as to what editions, what books, what we use, and all that. This is just kind of a brief rundown of the basics of what this is. So Vampire the Masquerade is a tabletop role-playing game of personal horror, where you play the role, obviously, of a vampire in a city in the modern nights in a dark, twisted version of our reality. It is not a direct reflection of the real world. It is a modern urban fantasy world. Key to that is your goal is to politic and play systems of intrigue and socialization, sometimes fighting. But basically, you are the secret supernatural creatures that lie underneath the hidden layer of the world, the one that mortals don't see. Much as you expect from most basic concept of vampires, you need to drink blood. You are tentatively immortal, minus, your head getting cut off, brutally maimed, fire, sunlight's real bad, all of that stuff. The basics for this can, of course, be found in both the Vampire the Masquerade core tabletop book. Either I would recommend V20 or the revised edition. For Larp, I would definitely recommend the Laws of the Night revised. It is a slimmed down version of the tabletop, so it's missing a bunch of the nuance that can be overlooked. But if you're just looking for basics, it's not a bad place to start. Now, every vampire in Vampire the Masquerade has what's called a clan. These are one of the 13 different houses, if you will, of vampires. Each has their own story, their own weakness, their own special gifts that they can use. And each one has a unique playing experience. Some easier than others. I'll review them kind of in brief. First, you have the Toreador clan. These are the artists. You would think more along the lines of Lestat or Louis from the Vampire Chronicles as kind of a good inspiration for the Toreador. Their weakness is that they are easily overwhelmed by art and things along those lines. Next, you have what are called the Tzimisce. They are one of the monstrous clans of the Sabbat. They are what you think of when you think of Bram Stoker's Dracula. They meld flesh, command animals, and generally kind of explore body horror as their main kind of theme. And they have to bury themselves nightly in the dirt upon which the land they were born in. Next, you got the Gangrel. The gangrel are closest to wanderers and animals and things of that nature. They can take the classic form of a bat and a wolf that is often associated with vampires. They can, its later levels, go and turn into mist. Their weakness is the more that they freak out, they gain bestial features. They'll get fur, cat's eyes, things like that. They have a general wanderlust, and like to be loners of a sense. After them, you have the followers of Set. These are basically Egyptian vampires that follow Set. They have a dark, ancient religion, are generally viewed as corruptors and of a religious nature. They tend to defy mortal norms and believe in free will among all else. Now, they're one of the independent clans, so they don't belong to one of the sects, which we will get into later. Next, you have the Venture. The Venture are kind of the leaders and CEOs and corporate vampires that have a tie to like ancient nobility and feudalism. Kings of the vampire world, they like to call themselves. After that, you have the Lasombra, the second clan of the Sabbat. They're somewhat of the dark kings of the vampire world and in the Sabbat itself. They wield the powers of shadow, can control the minds of others, and believe in a Darwinistic philosophy of only the strong survive. After them, you have the Asomites. The Asomites are nominally an independent clan from the Middle East. They're very much inspired of, if you think like things like Assassin's Creed. They are a mysterious group of vampires that seem to hunt other vampires for their blood and for their own reasons and have their own dark religion, but can be hired out at a cost, usually. There's, of course, variants. I'm giving a very brief overview. But that's basically the Asomites. Next, you have the Robnos. The Robnos are illusion-wielding tricksters. They're another one of the independent clans. They have their origins in India and have spread out across the world. Recently, in the canon of the world and the story, they were devastated in around 1999. We'll cover history and big events like that later on in this series. But they have a tendency to need to engage in certain vices. That's kind of their thing. After them, you have the Malkavians. The Malkavians are often confused as the crazy vampires. They're not crazy so much as they see more of the world than most vampires or other people do. They're prophets and seers. And their madness in understanding the world gives them power and strength. After them, you have the Giovanni. The Giovanni are necromancers, another one of the independent clans. They are mafioso and involved in the underworld and criminal enterprises, and generally are focused on those endeavors along with those of the lands of the dead where ghosts reside. After the Giovanni, you have the Bruja. The Bruja are fiery, passionate vampires. They tend to be rebels, usually with or without a cause. They can be found across all walks of vampire society. And they tend to be frontline fighters. They fight a lot. And their weakness is that they tend to freak out more in what's called frenzy. When a vampire reaches certain stimuli, they have a chance that what's called their beast may take over and cause them to do violence or run away. After them, you have the Tremere. The Tremere are one of the core Camarilla clans. They're vampire undead mages. They focus on the occult. Think less D&D and more Lovecraftian magic to kind of give a better sense of what the Tremere are like with this very hierarchy structure, very rigid. After the Tremere, you have the Nosferatu. These are hideous vampires that tend to dwell in the sewers that deal in information. Those are your basic 13 clans of Vampire the Masquerade. There are many bloodlines and variations of that, and that's a very basic overview. Each clan has their own clan book, which goes into depth into the various factions within the clan, the sects they belong in, their cultures, all of that, and I would highly recommend those. So that's just a real basic overview of what Vampire the Masquerade. It's basically taking all of these 13 clans and they don't get along and they've got to figure out ways to get along and the wars that happen, the conflicts that result from those. Now, what is the world of darkness? The world of darkness is like I said, the modern urban fantasy reflection of our world. Its primary themes are Gothic punk. So Gothic in the style of architecture, of towering skyscrapers with gargoyles and spires. Punk being the rebellion about the crushing nature of the world itself, the oppressiveness of human and supernatural society, a need to rebel against it. Now, the World of Darkness is not just vampires. Pretty much every monster type you can think of exists within this horror game. Besides vampires, there are werewolves that have their own agenda and their own culture, their own clans, if you will. After werewolves, you have mages. These are humans that have the power to work true magic, the ability to bend reality in the world around them. You have wraiths. These are ghosts, those that people that have died, and they exist in the lands of the dead, which is a separate world unto itself. Then you have changelings. Changelings are based on fairy mythology and culture. And then you have the Kindred of the East. These are vampires of Asia that tend to follow the cultural mythology and beliefs, obviously, of Asia. Then you have Demon the Fallen. If you like Paradise Lost or what's that movie with Christopher Walken? Prophecy. If you like Prophecy, Demon the Fallen is kind of your game. You're a demon that has escaped hell and resides in a human body and trying to cope with the modern world. And then lastly, you have Hunter the Reckoning. Hunter is what it sounds like. You're a group of humans who've been empowered by something to give you the strength to fight against all the other kind of things I mentioned. Like I said earlier, this video series is really intended for vampire. The other creatures I mentioned are all parts of the World of Darkness. They have their own game lines, their own divisions and culture. And the organization we play, One World by Night Games, there are games for werewolves, mages, wraith, variety of different options, and each one of these has a different kind of theme of what they're going for. For example, werewolf is themed as savage horror, whereas vampire is themed after personal horror. Two very, very different types. I definitely recommend checking out those books if that's something that interests you. The core books for each of those are all good places to start. But that kind of gives you a general overview of the World of Darkness. All of these creatures live together and on occasion will intersect with one another. Now the next question becomes, what is a LARP? Well, a LARP stands for live action roleplay. Its origins come from the tabletop games that you can kind of see behind me there. Tabletop is where you and a group of friends sit around a table and tell a story together using a rule system and dice and mechanics to, whenever you come into conflict, kind of figure out and resolve how those things get done. Who wins what? If your character tries to break into a car, can your character succeed into a break into a car? That's why we have systems for that. Live action roleplay came out as an evolution of that, of people that wanted to play these games larger than 5 friends sitting around a table. These can be 20, 30, 100. I've run events that have had over 500 players. Everybody has their own individual character, and instead of sitting around a table, you actually act it out. You dress up as your character. You kind of escape who you are for a little while and become the character that you have created to interact with other people, and that's called role-playing. To bounce back and one and off each other, and the ultimate goal is to tell a story together, a collaborative story. So LARPs in itself have been around for a very, very, very long time. Usual session will run from about, I'll say 8 p.m. to midnight on a weekend. Some do weekdays, but usually a good 4 to 5 hours. So as long as these sessions run. And during that time, storytellers, and these are the people that run the games, will come and introduce problems or issues or what we call story beats, plots, to kind of get your characters to have something to do besides just sit around and talk. There will be problems in the city that need solving, mysteries to be found out, all sorts of things. And it's up to you to figure out how you want to do that, how you want to handle it. Now the question really becomes, for our purposes here in these videos, what system do we use? Predominantly, One World by Night uses the Laws of the Night revised system from 1999, 2000, around that area. Some games in Brazil, particularly, use the By Night Studios LARP rules, but the vast majority of One World by Night uses Laws of the Night revised. These are all books you can get on Drive-Thru RPG. You can buy physical copies off eBay. Obviously, I have all of them right there myself. That's for pretty much the entirety of the World of Darkness and LARP in general, besides the tabletops books I've got behind me. Which again can seem extremely overwhelming, and the point and the goal of these videos is to kind of help shrink that down so it doesn't seem so difficult. And it's really not once it's been explained. So really you'd want to focus on the Laws of the Night revised series, or Laws of the Wild for Werewolf, etc. They're called Laws of. So that's the core system. So after that, what exactly is One World by Night? One World by Night was started in 1995, and it was a group of a couple of what we call independent LARPs. These are just games that pop up in your area. They don't have any connection to anyone else or really anything. It's just kind of a group of friends. Well, these games got together and decided, wouldn't it be cool if our game's interconnected? The story's interconnected. You could take your character from one game to the next game. And that grew from that time to encompass over 100 different games across the world. One World by Night is one of the oldest LARP organizations for World of Darkness still in existence. It has an ongoing story that has been going since 1995. The organization itself doesn't have a reset like some organizations do, or after 5 years or so, everyone's character kind of ends, those stories close, and they start a new series. One World doesn't do that. It's a continuing story since that time. So the actions of people in 1995 are just as valid as they were then as they are today. They may still have ripple effects down the line for the things that they have done. And one of the ultimate goals of One World by Night is, instead of being a top-down organization, it's a bottom-up. The games themselves, the individual games, have the most power and authority in the organization. They are kind of like states versus federal rights in many ways, with the states having a bit more power. Every ST can run whatever plot they want, allow whatever characters they want into their games, and each storyteller decides what the theme of their game is. If their game's a vampire game, a werewolf game, or what we call a mixed genre game, meaning they allow multiple different game lines to play in the game. It's all decided by then. There are what's called the OWBN, which is the abbreviation for One World by Night, bylaws. The bylaws are the agreeing body of rules that all the games kind of agree to. These will include rules and limitations on how players can get rare things that are printed in the books for the World of Darkness. Kind of governs that. So they're broken down into 3 different types of bylaws. You have administrative, which is just what it sounds like, administration. These are the basic rules. What is a game? What is a game's jurisdiction? What is a storyteller? What is a player? How does this organization operate? Who has authority? That's the administrative bylaws. Next, you have the character bylaws, which kind of detail what is rare in our organization for a player to have, and what isn't, and how to acquire those things. They're very long. I recommend using Control F when on the web page to kind of look what you're looking for, and you'll find it pretty easy. Next, you have the coordinator bylaws. Coordinators are elected individuals to oversee different aspects of the World of Darkness and how it plays in the organization. Kind of the general plot and theme of where the clan's going, questions players may have, regulation of important and powerful things for those groups. And those bylaws dictate their rules and authority in that one. So how does that all work? We have what's called One World by Night Council. Council is the ultimate and final authority on everything. Every game in the organization gets one council member. And they can sit on the council, which is an email list. And council members are allowed to put forth to council anything they feel that should be decided and voted upon by the organization. As long as a second council member says, yeah, that's a good idea, and seconds it, we vote on it. And generally, most of the time, the majority vote of how that vote goes decides the issue. This can be things from updates to bylaws, new plots, new packets, or disciplinary issues that come up across the org. The council is the final authority and decides. The games, like I said, have the ultimate authority. Generally, through the council member, decide the direction, organization, and basically everything about One World by Night. So I mentioned briefly packets. What are packets? Packets are a document that is created by a coordinator team. Generally, those individuals, again, that oversee a clan, a supernatural group type, things like that. And the packets provide updated information on those things for where they are in One World by Night, kind of giving players ideas and suggestions on how to play those things and expand upon them, giving more options. They also mostly contain what we call converted mechanics. These are tabletop rules systems that were never given a live action system conversion. The goal of live action in and of itself was to take the tabletop system and simplify it. So at the core of it, it's driven by the tabletop system with a shrunk down version for ease of play and simplification. As you can see, there's only so many live action books, but there's a whole lot more of those tabletop books. And in One World by Night, we allow those tabletop books, but they have to be converted to those rules. So the packets often contain those updates and rules as a result. As I mentioned earlier, the coordinators are each individuals that look over different aspects of the game world itself, or the administrative side as well. We have a head coordinator who's kind of what it sounds like in charge of the executive coordinator team. They solve disputes, they mediate problems, they run over financials, give direction for the organization as a whole, and below the head coordinator are 2 assistant head coordinators. Also, on the administrative side, you have the archivist. The archivist's job is to, when your character gets approved for that really rare thing, put it in a log somewhere so that in the future someone can go, oh yeah, they were approved for that thing. Then you have the marketing coordinator, whose job is to promote the organization. Finance coordinator's job is to handle the money. Historian's job is to keep the history of the organization and make that readily available. In Vampire in particular, again, that's really what we're going to focus on. All of the clans have their own coordinator that oversee everything about that. They also have the sect coordinators for the Camarilla, the Anarchs, and the Sabbat. And then you have, let's see, what else is there? And then there's obviously a coordinator for Werewolf, Mage, Wraith, Changeling, all of that. And all of that can be found on the website. I mentioned earlier, but the books that we particularly allow in One World by Night, these are specifically allowed, is for the LARP rules themselves, the first edition book, which I'll show you what that looks like as soon as I find it. This is the first edition Vampire the Masquerade LARP. This is allowed. Next, you have second edition, also known as Silver Book. This is allowed. And then lastly, you have Revised Edition. This is the primary rules that we use in One World by Night. Additionally, I mentioned earlier the By Night Studios rule set for LARP is allowed. But there's an exception to that. That game system is very different from this one. So if a game uses the By Night system, they only use that book. They can only use that book. There's no crossover between this and that. Now, for the tabletop books, that again, we allow in the organization, they just have to be converted to these mechanics, is 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th edition, also known as V20. 3rd edition is known as Revised. 1st edition is 1st. 2nd is 2nd. They were known as that. We do not allow 5th edition. 5th edition is a wildly different game to those previous editions, goes for different themes and goals, and does not fit in what we're playing. Additionally, Chronicles of Darkness, also known as the New World of Darkness, separate game lines, separate world. We don't use those as well. So the next question is, like, how do you play One World by Night? Well, obviously you have to find a game. Most states have a game. Our website will link those games as well. But basically, the ultimate is you create a character. You come up with who you want to play before anything else. What's the story of the person you want to play? How did they become a vampire? Come up with their costume and their quirks. And if at all most beneficially, if you knew someone at the game, try to create a shared story that helps really people get in very quickly. The key thing to remember is every game has their own set of what's called house rules. House rules are clarifications and variants of existing rules. And you want to check those out, read those, and make sure you understand them, because every game has very different house rules. No two games play alike. Each game is going for a different theme and mood and purpose of their games. Some games are very action-packed, and that's their main goal and drive. Some games are very Lovecraftian horror mystery. Some are very just political, and their house rules kind of reflect those states. Below, I'm going to post some links that are going to be really useful for you, which is going to be the main OWBN One World by Night website, which will have, like I said, all of the bylaws and basic information you need. I'm also going to post a link to the One World by Night wikis. This is where people post their characters, some information of the changes of the genre, and things like that. And then lastly, what I find the most useful, the White Wolf wiki itself is a plethora of useful information that you can spend many hours going into, and go a real deep dive on that if you want to. So that's going to about sum up our first introductory video here. It's just kind of a basic overview of what is Vampire and One World by Night. What's to come is the next episode, we're going to kind of talk about the history of One World by Night, the differences and everything that's happened since 1995, as much as I can remember anyways. After that, we're going to go into a brief rundown of mechanics, the engine of how we play this game when there needs to be conflict resolution, and really what those are. Episode 4 is going to be dedicated to packets, what's in an OWBN packet, we're going to get them, those sort of things. Episode 5 is going to be dedicated completely to blood magic. That is a whole world of its own thing that's going to definitely take an episode. Episode 6 is going to be a breakdown of combat when characters end up fighting, both what we call PvP and PvE and what those things are. Episode 7, I'm going to break down to the merits of a character, kind of where you can find little interesting quirks for your characters and rare books and things like that and what's available. Episode 5, I'm going to dedicate to tabletop and its history, origins, its ties to One World by Night and LARPing, and what the differences are and how that works. Episode 9, I'm going to give a breakdown of the sects itself. These are the individual factions and groups of vampires, what they are, their history, things like that. And then lastly, in episode 10, I'm going to give a more detailed breakdown on each of the clans. So that's our goal here. I'm going to try to maybe even get some guests for these episodes. Hopefully they'll end up being really useful for you guys. Again, the goal here is to kind of compile all this information into like an easy 10 video series so that new players or old players can watch and review and get a refresher. Hopefully helps them. So until next time, have a good one.